Good morning, legends. Eldred here. This morning, I wanted to talk about power meters. I got up this morning after the weekend ride where I was feeling good. I launched some attacks. You guys, those of you who saw the film, and you saw that I was looking at my heart rate and so forth and so on. And it dawned on me that this was a perfect time to flow into one of our legends, Michaelides, I hope I pronounced that correctly. He asked a question after I did the 200th anniversary video where I was saying, I was soliciting ideas. He said, do amateurs need power meters? Then he posed a second follow-up question in the same statement. He said, is a power meter helpful? Well, I'm going to answer it in this way. Power meters are not a need. So whether you're an amateur or a pro, you don't need a power meter. Are they helpful? Yes. And then I'm going to lead into why I made those statements. It's important that people understand that without a power meter, if you know what you're doing, you can still improve. Now, people I train, I ask them especially if they're not local, I want them to have a power meter because this comes to the helpfulness of the power meter. It's a tool that gives objective information. And what I talked about using my heart rate during my effort in the ride, unless you've actually trained with heart rates over a long period of time, it's hard to rule out the variables. The example that I'm referring to in that video, I launched an attack for like 30 seconds, really hard. Heart rate has no play in that because it needs minutes to get up to speed. And so when you think about it with the example I'm using is, I launched the attack for 30 seconds. My heart rate meant bupkis. I went as hard as I could, got the gap, sat down, then I started using the heart rate to keep my effort somewhere. Now, if I hadn't gotten enough sleep or if I were tired or it was very humid, the numbers in the heart rate would have been different. So you can't get hung up on numbers when it comes to heart rate. And that's one of the issues with heart rate is that not only is there a lag, the numbers vary based on how your body physiologically is functioning. Are you hydrated and so forth and so on. So you don't get hung up on numbers too much, but the actual numbers. But I want to relate it to power meters from the heart rate, which may seem strange, but bear with me. Just like there are variabilities in the heart rate numbers based on whether you had enough sleep or whatever else is going on in the environment, it doesn't mean that the numbers are bad. If your heart rate today is saying you're at 175, because you didn't sleep well when it should be saying you're at 170. It doesn't really matter because whatever numbers you're tracking, if it says 175, and the example when I broke away, what I was using was, okay, I'm going to keep it at 175. It's a value that you're using to measure your effort. Same thing with power meters. The brands, like you've got Cyclops, you've got SRM. Quartz, a bunch of different brands. I would talk generally about where they go on the bike. Whether you take a Cyclops power meter or SRM or whatever, and you put them, let's say you put the data that they give you. There's a guy named DC Rainmaker who I highly recommend his site. I will give the link as well because he does full length reviews on the different power meters and is very thorough. So the numbers of a power meter itself, its value comes from consistency. So regardless of what brand of power meter you get, if it's telling you you're at 100 watts, and every time you do that effort, that power meter says you're at 100 watts, that's a good power meter. If you compare it to SRM, and SRM says you're at 110 for the same effort, and this other brand says you're 100, it doesn't really matter because within itself, it has consistency. If it has consistency, then it's fine. It's going to work. So you don't want to worry about one power meter versus the other and whether the numbers are exactly the same for all these power meters, whether you have a vector pedals or the P1 pedals or whatever. As long as the power meter you have gives you consistent values, then you can use it as a training tool. But what I wanted to put the caveat here is, don't just go out and buy a power meter. Learn how to use it. Because if you don't learn how to use it, then you're really not going to get the value out of it. And there are two ways to deal with a power meter. Let me get a book here. I highly recommend this book. Okay, this book, I've read the whole book. I used to have a power meter, and you're probably surprised to hear that. But if you're new to the channel, because I think some of the other guys have heard me mention it, I owned a Cyclops G3, which went into a wheel. And I used it for a while. It was fine, it was nice, you got numbers. Or did it make me any faster? No. I mean, I just got numbers that told me my average power and so forth and whatever my threshold was, because I did the tests after reading the book and whatever. And the point I'm trying to make is, if you buy a power meter, you want to know how to use it so you can establish your baselines. You want to be able to establish your threshold power. Just like they have a functional threshold heart rate, they have a functional threshold power called FTP. You establish that and you take percentages of that to set up your training zones. And that's what I use for people who are remote. Because if you're not here for me to really gauge and ride with you and see, power meter numbers are best for me to know what kind of workout you did, that you actually did the workout that's prescribed by your zones. Because if you don't work in those zones, you can't expect to perform in those zones. So for example, the effort that I made, if I've never made that effort during my training, my body would have been in shock when I tried that. And I wouldn't have been able to recover quickly and even and finish the ride. So when I train people, it's important that I know that they've done the work. So yes, you will find most coaches suggest a power meter for that very purpose. Now, doesn't mean you can't coach somebody with heart rate data. It's just not as precise because of all the variables in there. So caveat is, okay, so why Eldred, are you only using a heart rate monitor today and you don't have a power meter? I have multiple bikes, and my issue is I need a power meter that I can transfer fairly easily between bikes. And I know some of you who have done the research are thinking, well, there's a P1 out there. Yeah, the P1 from Cyclist was great. You know, great power meter came out, and I was like, man, I was tempted, but here's the deal. I used to ride the look style cleats, and they just gave me hot spots galore. Okay, they're just too small. I had ridden when I competed, I used to compete on Shimano. I never had any hot spot with no problems. And then over the years, after I stopped competing in 2002, I bought a new bike from a shop in Austin, and the guy just put on like a look pedal on there. I didn't think it was a big deal. You know, I had to adjust my saddle height higher because the look pedal has a higher platform, a stack height. And other than that, it was okay. But I just found it to be too narrow. And so I prefer the Shimano platform, was nice and wide. And so I'm not going to switch to a power meter for that. So I've been researching power meters. Eventually I will get one. They're nice to have. But what I want to stress in this video is, think about Laurent Fignon, think about Greg LeMond, think about Bernard Hinault, all these boys. They didn't have power meters. You know, there is a story in an article I read that Johan Museo, the Lion of Flanders, was out on a training ride with some guys in Belgium. And this one guy showed up, he had heart rate monitor, power meter, you name it, all the latest bells and whistles, all the gadgets. And this was when power meter was kind of new. So they went out on a ride and Mr. Power Meter got dropped. And so they stopped at the cafe. Once everybody regrouped, and there was, in the article, it says that Johan asked him, what was your power meter saying when you got dropped on that hill? And that was the joke, okay? Don't get a power meter thinking it's going to make you a new rider instantly. You still have to do the work. And don't get hung up whether it's a power meter, cyclometer, whatever. Doesn't mean anything. I can ride my bike with nothing on it. Okay, my coach, one day I went to a race. I had a coach and we were racing and my cyclometer wasn't working back in the day, mid-90s. And I told him, I said, I rolled back to the car and said, my cyclometer is not working. How am I going to know my speed? And what he told me was, if you're at the front, you're going fast enough. If you're at the back, you need to go faster. And and I think back and I laugh at it. So, point I'm making here is, guys, power meters are great. If you can afford it, get one, but learn how to use it. Don't just get it and put it on your bike and look at power numbers when you're riding down the road. That's not going to do much for you. You need to establish the zones that you're going to be training in with that power meter so that you can go out on the specific day and hit those zones. If you've never hit those zones, when it's time to do it, your body will freak out. You won't be able to go, And this is the comment I made about in one of my videos where I said, go very hard or go slow. If you guys who follow the Festive 500, if you can think about it, most of the rides in the Festive 500 when I filmed them, if you remember, I was in zone 2 or zone 1. Periodically, I might have hit zone 3. So that was like 500 kilometers, easy, base training. It didn't slow me down any in the other video when I needed to go full gas. The point I'm making is you have to have a specific zone for each day that you're planning to hit as a goal. And then if you go out there and you can't hit it, maybe your body's tired, that's fine. But you have to use the micro cycle of a week and have each day where you're tasting those zones so that you introduce your body to those efforts. Because if you've never gone very hard, when somebody does go very hard, your body is not prepared or trained to be able to process for that zone. I mean, when you get into those zones, your body is using different energy sources. That's why you shouldn't be riding hard all the time, because then you're burning your carbs and so forth and so on. So I'm getting a little off topic here. Power meters they have different styles. They have some that are on the crank. They have some that's in the bottom bracket. The one I talked about in the wheel. Now they got power pedals and they got several models from different, and that's why I recommend DC Rainmaker. He will give you that. If you can afford a power meter, get a power meter. They're good, but they're not a need. If you think about it today, even the guys in the pro peloton that use power meters, look at them. They're still wearing a heart rate monitor. The reason they do that is they're comparing those two devices. They're looking at their data after the fact and saying, what was my heart rate doing when I was producing this power? That's how they track the improvement. So if you start producing more power at this heart rate, then you see the direction of your training. The training's working. If you're producing less, then maybe you need a rest. That's what that's about. So you kind of have to look at them as a tool. I don't have a power meter on any of my bikes, and I explained the reasons why. I'm waiting for a model that will work for me. I was kind of hoping Shimano would produce a pedal power meter because I already used their pedals. There had been rumors, but it hasn't happened yet. Now you got 4ii and other things coming out. I'm looking at those to see, because all I want is a power meter that gives consistent numbers within itself. I don't care how it compares to SRM or whatever else. But I'm a techie. I have an IT background, so I never jump on new technology first. You got to let it mature a little bit. So I'm still doing the research. Now, even though I don't have a power meter, my riding is still the same. I can go on a ride and have nothing on the bike and still ride. And I made the joke about what my coach said. So don't get hung up on that. If you're an amateur, yeah, a power meter will help you narrow your training if used properly. But don't worry about not having a power meter. So it's not a need for an amateur. It's really it's an effective tool to have. If you don't have it, or if you don't have the money to buy it, it's not going to stop you from riding your bike. It's not going to stop you from improving. Even if you don't have a heart rate monitor, you can still improve. I talked about Le Mans, Fignon, all those boys. They'll go out and ride. They wouldn't even have a cyclometer on their bikes. They just go out and ride. It didn't stop them from winning the tours. So the thing is that there are ways to train without any tools on the bike. It may not be the most effective way, but don't get hung up on it. Okay, so I always like to throw these caveats in there to say, yeah, it's nice to have, but if you don't have it, hey, it's not going to hold you back. You get out there, you don't have anything on your bike. When you're going hard and you're out of breath, you know you're going hard. Well, if you can have a conversation, you know you're going at zone 1 or zone 2, conversational zone. So you should be able to do both, in my opinion. People that I work with, there are rides where I tell them no meters, no cyclometers, no power meters, no nothing, no heart rate. Just go ride comfortably. Get to know. And even when they're using these devices, I get them to use the RPE, the rate of the perceived effort. You have to get to know what it feels like in those zones, because these devices might crap out one day. Then what if you're too dependent on them? They're great for after your ride to sit down and download it to the computer and look at. That's what I use them for. So even though I was referring to my heart rate on that ride, it was a tool that I used on that ride to make sure I did not make it easy to get caught. I kept the effort there with that tool. And that's what you want to use these things for. They're tools. So I can't is this video to get into how you actually use a power meter and all of that. That's a whole different topic. That's why I showed that book. This book is Training and Racing with a Power Meter by Hunter Allen and Andrew Colgan. I will put a link down there to where, if you're interested, you can find the book. It's very technical, but the good thing is it has details on how to find your functional threshold power, and it explains how to use power meters in detail. Now, not every cyclist out there is going to want to read this technical book. That's kind of something I like to do, but it's not for every cyclist. So if you just bought a power meter and you say, man, you know what? I don't have time to read this book, Eldred, or, I just want to go out and ride with my power meter. What's the cheat sheet or the quick setup guide? Well, take the power meter out on a hard group ride or on a hard training ride, turn it on, see what your average power is. Start with that, because whatever that average power is on that hard ride, you're going to have to be true to yourself, meaning if you're going to do it that way, don't turn the power meter on per se or the average for the power meter until you hook up with the group. Once it gets hot and heavy, you want to turn it on for that section, or do like a lap. Yeah, you do a lap, use your lap timer, because the power meter, you can pair it with your Garmin or whatever you're using. When you hook up with the group, do your lap timer, turn it on, and then turn it off after the hot part of that ride. And then, because you're going hard, then use that as a gauge. But then you're going to have to keep using that every quality ride and compare your numbers, because that will give you a good idea of how much power you're turning on when you're really going hard. Now that you could say, okay, well, this is the average for the group, but it's still with the group. The group pumps you up. You go a lot harder with the group because you got adrenaline and you got other forces. So what I suggest is, by yourself, go out and do, say, for 5 minutes, go as hard as you can. You warm up and everything. You warm up for 15 minutes, and then for 5 minutes, go hard. Start your lap timer, go hard for 5 minutes, and see what average heart rate you get there. The book says you should do 20 minutes, but there are parts of the book that also recommend that, most people are not going to want to go hard for 20 minutes. It's just too long. So if you do 5 minutes, they tell you to subtract 5% from that number. I'm not going to go into all of that and say that, because the key is you don't have to have exact numbers. You just need to be in the range. Okay, you want to go hard for 5 minutes, because as long as you're consistent, then you'll develop your own base. So if you went hard for 5 minutes and you say, okay, this is my average, or this is my functional threshold power, this is the power I could maintain when I was going hard, and I'm talking hard, okay, time trial pace, okay, and you say, okay, then the next time, maybe after a week or two or whatever, test yourself again. You have to test yourself, or you have to record new power group rides average, so that you can see whether your numbers are changing or not. And then you take the different percentages, you know, whether below 65% for this zone and so forth and so on, so you can establish training power numbers. That's what's important. If you don't have your power zones, just like you have your heart rate zones, then you're not gonna know what numbers means you're taking it easy. But you can also do a cheat sheet in that regard and say, okay, I feel like I'm going easy. What is the power meter telling me? Because you know the power meter is consistent. So from an RPE, from your perception of the effort, if you feel you're going easy, look at the average for when you feel you're going easy. If you feel you're going medium, what is the average for that ride that I went medium? If you feel you're going very hard, what was the average when I went very hard? Or if you feel I'm going maximum, what's the average when you sprint? That's a short maximum effort. The power meter records that. So you're gonna have to keep track of all these numbers. And you don't have to buy this book to use a power meter. You just have to use common logic and relate it and say, okay, I did a sprint, I went balls out, I was feeling great. What did the power meter tell me? It'll give you your maximum wattage. You record that in your journal, you upload, however you get the data of your cyclometer, you record that, because then what you're gonna say is, okay, that day I went 1200 watts. Why am I going 800 watts today when I say I'm sprinting? Maybe you're tired. Maybe you've been training too much and you haven't rested. That's what those numbers are for. That's what I mean. You don't have to read that book. It helps to have it so you have something objective to refer to that teaches you. But you can just use common logic and just say, okay, this is my easy day. I got a new power meter. Let me see what numbers it generates when I'm on an easy ride. And you use that. Okay, this is my medium ride. What did it generate? You can use that as your training zone. That would work too. Because all you want to do is to be consistent. So I think I'm going to stop there. I hope I answered the question on power meter clearly. It's nice to have. It doesn't stop you from riding, as I summarize here. So don't get hung up on it. Having a power meter is not going to make you a transformed rider overnight. It will help you focus your training. So if you're doing the work, it will help you focus your training. But it's not going to magically transform you into some superstar overnight if you don't do the work. Now, don't buy a power meter and get all hung up on it during the ride. You're just looking at numbers all the time and forget to enjoy cycling. Enjoy it. Let the power meter track the numbers for you. Don't worry about the power meter. Just ride. And then when you get home, download it to your computer when you're recovering and you got your legs up, and analyze what happened on the ride. I mentioned the story about Museo because this person supposedly in the article was transfixed on his gadget during the ride, as opposed to focusing on the dynamics of what the group was doing. And he may not have necessarily gotten dropped as easily had he been focused on riding instead of worrying about what his power meter was saying. And supposedly that's why Museo asked the question. So just keep that in mind the next time you go out on a ride with your heart rate monitor or whatever. I glance at data from time to time on my Garmin. I don't look at them all the time. I glance at it. When I come home and let's say the next day I'm super tired and I'm supposed to be recovered, then I start going back over that data. Okay, did I do too much? Was the ride too long? That's what the data is for. It's part of your diary so that when your performance goes up, you have confirmation as to why. When your performance goes down, you have confirmation, because having the answers to why you're improving or why you're tired goes a long way to relieving the concerns in your mind. And that's necessary for every athlete. Okay, so with that, I'm going to close it up. Put your comments below. Feel free. Let me know what I may have missed. Let's share information here because there's no one hard, fast rule for all these tools. Be good out there and be safe when you're riding.